Professor Simcox is at Stetson University College of Law. And she's a reporter for the Uniform Law Commission's Model Veterans Treatment Court Act team or panel, and she's going to present their update. We also have many copies of their executive summary and then their current draft of the Model Veterans Treatment Court Act. So many of you probably picked this up when you came in. We have a lot of copies left over. Feel free to come and grab these up front or pass them around. And we also have a biography for Professor Simcox in your welcome packet. So I'll skip the biographic introduction and let you just jump into the presentation.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Well, I'm sorry I couldn't be with you at this really important conference, and I do appreciate you giving the Uniform Law Commission just a few minutes. I don't plan on talking for 20 minutes. I was actually hoping to get feedback from you regarding the act or things that you think might be important to consider for it. I was told that it might be helpful to give a little bit of background about the Uniform Law Commission for those who might not be familiar with it. So the Uniform Law Commission started in 1892, believe it or not, and it's really a state-supported organization. Commissioners, there are over 300 of them, are appointed by state governors, and they work with the Uniform Law Commission on different committees to drive uniform laws for the country at no pay, for no pay. They do it pro bono, and they work thousands of hours. I've seen them do it. The purpose of the Uniform Law Commission is to create unity across the states in areas of law where it would be beneficial. So, for instance, you may be familiar with the Uniform Commercial Code, the Uniform Probate Code, since I'm a Trust and Estates professor as well, the Uniform Trust Code, the Uniform Child Custody Jurisdiction Enforcement Act. Those are some of the acts that have come from the ULC. And the model act that we're working on now deals with veterans courts. The commissioners sit on a committee, and I was asked to be the reporter based on the last decade of work I've done with veterans law. I'm not a commissioner myself, but I was asked to make a draft after studying all of the veterans courts across the country and the very few pieces of legislation that there are regarding these courts, as I'm sure you're already well aware after being at this conference for 2 days. So based on my research and my experience working with veterans, I drafted a model act and brought it to the committee. This process takes 2 years, and the committee meets twice during the year, and then in the summertime, the entire conference meets, the entire Uniform Law Commission. And at this summer conference, which we're getting ready to do in July, and the act that you have with you is what's going to be read on the floor of this conference, the commissioners are going to go through every single line of the act, word by word, and comment on what they think is appropriate or not appropriate, and ask if certain considerations were made. So a lot of thought goes into these court acts. It's not just the commissioners, though, who sit on these committees. There are also legal observers or other types of observers who have specialized knowledge. So, for instance, on our committee, we've asked Swords to Plowshares to join. Also, Justice for Vets is part of our committee as an observer. We've got AmVets, Professor Christine Husky from Arizona, who does veterans court work. We've got some veterans court judges on the committee as observers. The ABA, I don't know if I mentioned the National Center for State Courts, the Office of the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, and a number of other VSOs, Veteran Service Organizations. So with their good ideas, what you see in front of you is at least the act that's going to the Uniform Law Commission this summer. There'll be 2 more meetings after this of the committee, and then the final read of this act to see if it's what we want to put forth to the states will happen in the summer of 2017. And this is just suggested legislation. Obviously, states are going to do what they want, but it's a proposal from a number of members of different states and observers on what the best uniformity of the act might be. So I thought it might be helpful to just kind of lay out what might be unique about our act after seeing a number of the states' statutes and veterans courts criteria. First, this act allows veterans and active duty members to come into the court, which is not always the case. Second, the character of discharge in this act does not matter, which I'm sure you've had discussion about over the last 2 days. Also, there's no requirement that the mental health or substance abuse disorder be related to service, and there's no requirement that the crime committed be related to the substance abuse or mental health disorder. Special attention is paid in this act to victims of domestic violence because, as anyone who works in the veterans arena knows, particularly for veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder, the family is usually the first to be involved in this type of situation. So we try to pay special attention to those family members who may be the only support that a veteran has. And finally, the act was meant to be very flexible, to give courts implementing or states implementing the act to allow their courts a lot of latitude in how they decide to set up treatment programs and mentorship and anything else that they may want to implement to make this a better system for their veterans. So really, that's all I wanted to say, because I know that you all have a lot of good ideas about what you've been talking about at this conference. And if you don't want to talk to me about your ideas now, you can always shoot me an email and we can talk by phone, because we're very interested in collecting comments or thoughts on the legislation that we have proposed now, at least to the summer conference, or any ideas that you think that we may have missed or you may think could enhance the act in some way. I'd love to get your comments on it. So does anyone have any questions or thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to rotate the camera. We have about 12 minutes, so this is the place to get the comments started, and then of course we can follow.
I'm going to take some notes while you talk, so I'm paying attention.
I'll rotate the camera and get started. Speak up if you can't hear.
Hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm Tim Avery, graduate student in clinical psychology. And under components of the program, section 4, item 5, I don't know the research how it compares between criminal justice and non-criminal justice clients, but the monitoring abstinence could be construed different ways, and abstinence might not be the best course of treatment for some clients. So I'm not sure what the language should be. I think monitoring is a good thing, but depending on somebody's knowledge about that, they might misapply what that means to monitor abstinence, such as requiring it and then kicking somebody out for various reasons for not complying, when in fact that's not what's best for their treatment.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe some legal folks can speak to that more specifically if that has to be required. And then under section 9, victims of domestic violence, item 1, including and counseling with the defendant if they both agree.
I wondered if someone was going to talk about that. Right. Go ahead.
That couples counseling for domestic violence is contraindicated.
Right. That provision, and that's the only provision, is in flux at the moment before it goes to the summer conference. It was suggested by some of the members who deal with domestic violence, and then the ABA stepped in and said that they didn't agree with that. So we're working on that provision right now to adjust it. Good catch. You're good at your job, whatever.
Thank you.
Hello, Rabia Bell at Stanford Law School. So I had a question about how does this, is there anything about parents who are veterans that are in this court? So if there are triggers for any type of child removal or child welfare services, is there anything that sort of interacts with that type of court procedure?
So we did not put that in the legislation, although as potential victims of domestic violence, they're included in treatment that might be offered to the victims. That's a good point, and I will bring it up at our next meeting. A lot of what we took from the other therapeutic courts, the drug courts and the mental health courts, and we had a number of experts in those areas on this committee, and children did not come up as much as you might think. So I'll bring it up at our next meeting. Thank you.
Hi. Oh, I did something. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Pratima Pandey. I am a commissioner on the ABA Commission on Sexual and Domestic Violence. I speak here today in my individual capacity and not as a commissioner, but I do want to thank you for including Section 9. I do know from Rebecca and others the work that has gone into getting you to add that. I want to echo the need to try to include, besides domestic violence, also sexual assault and stalking survivors, because the Commission, as the Commission has mentioned, the sexual assault victims and stalking victims are also at the same risk that domestic violence survivors are. And I want to echo what someone just said earlier about Section 1, the counseling piece. That is problematic, and I'm grateful that you are going through a revision of that piece. And finally, if there is some way to include the fact that victims of domestic violence could be defined broadly, not just those veterans who have come through the criminal justice system, but if there is an existing, for example, in the civil context, the work that I do includes representing survivors of domestic violence in family courts. So thinking about survivors who've interacted in family courts, who are victims where the accused party or the respondent is a veteran, that would also help sort of flesh this piece out to cover as many survivors as possible.
So do you suggest altering, I'm trying to follow that, do you suggest altering the definition of domestic violence?
Broadening it to include survivors of sexual assault and stalking.
Right, that part I got. Yeah,
And
the second?
the victims of domestic violence crimes could also include victims who are covered under a protective order in a civil context dealing with domestic violence.
Which section are you talking about specifically?
So right after Section 9, victims of domestic violence, you begin with a description. As part of the Veterans Court program, comma, victims of domestic violence crimes committed by the defendant. Somewhere there, if you just read victims of domestic violence crimes committed by the defendant, it is evident that you're talking about those who have interacted with the criminal justice system. In the last day and a half, I've realized, I'm actually quite nervous. I have my work cut out for me as a civil legal aid attorney. I've realized that there are survivors who could be coming through a veteran's sort of contact. You know, they had a boyfriend who's a veteran. There is nothing that has happened in the criminal justice context because we know survivors do not report. But what if the survivor has gone and got herself or himself a protective order in family court? Is there some way for this definition to include that as well?
Okay,
just food for thought.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is what the meetings I go to are like as well. Everybody talks at me and I take notes just constantly. So feel really at home.
And just a couple of things just to follow up on the definition of what a victim is. I think that's defined by statute. So I think there's going to be varying definitions depending on the state and how their statutes define victim. But the other thing I wanted to raise is hopefully maybe you can somehow include somewhere in your study here, or actually what you're proposing, to encourage the VA to offer domestic violence counseling sessions in the VA. Right now, at least in California, there are some VAs that offer them, but it's not across the board. California requires that the providers be certified, and there is really specific requirements. So I was hoping that maybe we can encourage the VA to offer these programs that are certified, 52 sessions, at least in California, to get it started. Oftentimes these programs cost a minimum of $25 per session, and most of our veterans are indigent and homeless, and that could be a reason why they might not be able to successfully complete. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Hopefully maybe somehow you can include that in your
Thank you.
I'd like to ask you to address a situation that arises out of states who have criminal records systems that maintain records of conviction, whether or not someone is found factually innocent. Because California has a criminal justice system, and under Penal Code Section 1203.4 offers what they call expungement, and what the Ninth Circuit has decided is decidedly not expungement in terms of the federal sentencing guidelines. And I believe that judges should have the discretion to order an expungement without a finding of factual innocence. Thank you.
Right, so we did discuss that. We actually did discuss California specifically in one of our meetings. And really, the act is written broadly. to address your concern, to allow the court to figure out what they want to do with that charge and that veteran, to memorialize at the beginning of treatment or their process within the system, and then to adjudicate it as they have agreed to.
Well, and that's the problem, is the Ninth Circuit has found out that historically in California, that expungement is not federal sentencing guideline compliant expungement.
Right, and we can't force the states to do what we would like them to sometimes, or the federal government. but this act does allow judges to, within their own parameters in the state, do what they want to.
Jude Litzenberger, California Veterans Legal Task Force. Thank you. The last two bills in California that have tried to authorize veterans treatment courts have passed the legislature unanimously, no problems at all, and been vetoed by our governors, both Republican and Democrat. And their reasons in their signing statements or their non-signing statements were, I don't want to have to fund these courts, and if I put them into legislation, that will happen, or there'll be at least an expectation. Veterans treatment courts aren't getting funded anywhere, and I think that's one of the things that you're going to fight in getting any sort of model statute done. Secondarily, the young man mentioned the monitoring abstinence by frequent alcohol and drug testing. I know that's a component of the drug programs in the drug courts. I think this is a real fallacy that judges in veterans courts have the authority legally to impose conditions of probation that have nothing to do with the offense. Where a veteran has no alcohol or drug involvement and comes into a veterans court, they're often put under conditions of abstinence, which I don't think are legally warranted and probably could be challenged if anybody wanted to do that. I'm really concerned that we're broadening what was drug court into veterans courts. Rather than having a veterans court where we address veteran-specific issues, we're basically running sometimes veterans court or drug courts for veterans. So that concerns me. I want to make some specific delineations that drug and alcohol testing is not warranted in every occasion. Maybe you could put if warranted. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just follow on to that point? On Jeff Ross, I'm a judge of the Veterans Justice Court in San Francisco, and what you have defined here is very much consistent with what we do. We have a very broad scope. Section 4, number 5, instead of saying monitoring abstinence.
Oh, wait, hold on, Judge. Hold on one second. Let me get there.
Section 4,
okay.
Components of program, number 5. Instead of saying
yes.
monitoring abstinence, could you just say monitoring use by frequent alcohol and drug testing? In my court, the key is we want people to go voluntarily and regularly, as I order them to, for testing, but we make it very clear that the results of that test will not result in any penalty to them unless we know the extent of their use. We can't help define a program that will address it. And
okay.
Second, I just wanted to clarify, going back to Section 2, Definition 7, veteran. In my court, anyone who has ever served in the military, no matter how long, is admitted into the court. I wasn't sure whether that is consistent with the definition of veteran, which says regardless of the character of the discharge. That sounds to me like honorable discharge or something less, but would you agree that that's broad enough to include someone who was only in the military for a limited period of time?
Well, we tried to make it that way, so right?
Okay.
Right, because everybody who's been in service has some discharge given to them. We tried to write it that way. Maybe we should make it a little bit clearer.
I thought it was clear. I just wanted to make sure that I was reading it correctly.
Right. It was meant to include everybody. Thank you.
Yes. Yes. I'm your average Joe, public member, veteran, disabled, a veteran. Okay. Section 4, and then I turn the page around on
Wait, you said Section 4?
Yes, and I'm Judge. Line 6.
Section 4, line 6.
Yes, and if we could just be, thank you, Judge. If you could please include, besides including foregoing partnerships with the Veterans Court, the Department of Veteran Affairs, if we could please insert and vet centers, because the Department of Veterans Affairs, usually hospitals require inpatient. Vet centers are also outpatient. So that's something that I go to as vet centers for PTSD. So that's major, big, that could be really.
So you don't think saying Department of Veterans Affairs is enough for the vet
No,
centers?
it's very broad. It's very broad because and most of the clinicians, they just say you're going to the hospital, the Department of Vet. But the vet centers are part of the same track. We have
Right.
separate treatment centers. They don't oversee our records, and they don't. So the vet centers were designed the same way. Congress
Right.
created that. So because Congress created the vet centers, we just want that included, if that's possible. If that would be,
Well, anything is possible. What I do is I take notes and then I bring it back to the committee, and then they vote. So,
And I'm sure the VA hospitals will probably oppose it because we give them numbers, but the vet centers are the same, identical, but they also evaluate for PTSD. So please give it
Right.
consideration.
thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Professor Simcox. I think this was really productive 20 minutes.
It was good for me. Thank you.
And so thank you for the work you're doing. And then she's obviously available for further follow-up comments. Her email's usually available online. And our next panel will be at 1:30. So we're going to transition to that. That's going to be on a very related subject of the eligibility for these veterans courts. So we're going to look at discharge status.
Thank you.